Breaking news: Camron and JimJones, formerly the monarchs of Dipset, have just been arrested following a horrific backstage altercation, which is now rocking the hip-hop industry to its core. Was it over old grudges, money, or something much darker? The reality may be more surprising than you think. For years, these two have built their empires on upheaval and controversy, but it's now gone too far. This isn't just a street battle. This is a full-blown breakdown of everything they've stood for. You won't believe the information we've unearthed. And here's the twist: what nobody expected behind-the-scenes truths are coming to light. Mistrust, treachery, and unfathomable maneuvers are surfacing, and the impact might ruin Dipset for long. This is the stay tight, because what you're about to hear will have you doubting everything you thought you knew about these hip-hop legends. Giants, believe me, this is the story no one saw coming. It was meant to be another night of celebration, another night of living the high life for Camron and JimJones. But what occurred behind closed it has left the whole hip-hop community dumbfounded and the rest of the world bewildered. The incident we're going to dig into wasn't just a fight. It was a public collapse of everything. Camron, the self-proclaimed king of Harlem, and JimJones, the fiery, unabashed figure who's constantly found himself in both, were meant to be generating money and enjoying their positions at the top. But this night was different. What transpired between them would resound through the business for years to come. It all began like any other night. The duo was attending a high-profile industry event, their faces plastered all over the VIP area, putting everything on display, yet something darker was forming beneath those glittering lights. The tension between the two had been building up for months. You have to remember, these two haven't exactly have the easiest of relationships. Sure, they were once a power couple, the backbone of Dipset, but underneath the gloss and celebrity, there's always been a simmering tension. A tension that no one quite comprehended. It wasn't long until the two began bickering backstage, and they weren't talking about just a basic dispute, but something far deeper. The words uttered weren't simply usual insults. What began as a verbal disagreement grew into a full-fledged physical confrontation, and the world was not prepared for the total catastrophe that ensued. On the surface, Camron and JimJones were simply two men, two legends in the rap game, enjoying their success. However, it turns out that the cracks had money, power, and ego. The same trinity that has ruined so many others before them have now caught up with them. Let's take a step back to examine how things escalated. We need to rapidly comprehend the past. Camron and JimJones' collaboration in Dipset was always a bit tricky. They had their ups and downs, and of course, their memorable moments. But if you look at their careers, it's clear to see that despite all of the success, there's always been a deep-rooted tension boiling just beneath the surface. Ego conflicts, you bet. Differing views for the future, absolutely. But what really set things off was the money. The sordid game of who gets what, who's in power, and who's pulling the strings. That's where the fractures first started to surface. Let's be honest, no one becomes as large as Camron and JimJones without stomping on a few toes along the way. What occurred from day one? There was a sense of competitiveness between the two. While both men had their responsibilities in Dipset, it was evident that each had their own objectives. Camron wanted to maintain his authority over the group, while JimJones was keen to carve out his own niche and legacy. The fact is that neither of them has ever been excellent at sharing the spotlight. Men wanted to be at the top, and while they'd always been able to patch things up when they battled, this time something had changed. The stakes were higher than ever, and that's when everything began to spin out of control. But here's the thing about these two legends: their public feuds never seemed to truly boil over. Sure, they'd fling insults at one another on social media, had a few furious confrontations and interviews, but most of the time it all felt like simply a game where the stakes were fame, drama, and attention. Let's return to the night of the epic incident. Imagine the situation. The mood backstage is electrifying. Tension is in the air. People are racing in all directions to get in position for the performance. Everything is set. The lights, the cameras, the flashing cameras from fans documenting the night. Everyone's seeking for that ideal image, that perfect moment. Camron and JimJones saw something was odd. Their typical friendliness was vanished. A few words were spoken, followed by a few more, until things began to escalate. It was the type of battle you only see in movies. As the verbal blows continued to fly, things moved from hot to downright explosive. One moment they were yelling at one another, and the next it was utter anarchy. In a matter of seconds, Camron allegedly shoved JimJones causing a violent conflict that involved the whole backstage area. Running for cover, security raced in, but it was too late. The two had already transformed the backstage into a war zone. With bottles, chairs, and equipment flying everywhere, the argument went on, but this wasn't just any fight, oh no. This was an all-out fighting between two individuals who had spent years together building an empire together. But now it seemed we were finally witnessing cracks that everyone else had missed. The violence was nearly unimaginable. Punches, bodies, falling into walls, people shouting, and the sounds of mayhem reverberating throughout the auditorium. It wasn't just a brawl. It was the end of an era, one of the most dramatic breakups in hip-hop history. And the public reaction was even greater. As soon as the word circulated, fans and critics alike couldn't believe what they were hearing. How could Camron and JimJones, two of the biggest names in the game, be at each other's throats like this? Were they really prepared to throw everything away for a backstage scuffle in the blink of an eye? Their entire careers and legacies were at stake. The aftermath of the backstage altercation between Camron and JimJones wasn't just a controversy. It was the stuff of legends. The streets swarmed with whispers, and the internet exploded with replies. Every fan, critic, and industry insider had an opinion, but as always, the truth was far more complex than anybody could have anticipated. What the public didn't realize was that the fight was merely the top of the iceberg. Behind the scenes, the tension between Camron and JimJones had been simmering for years, a powder keg waiting to erupt. Let's break it down. What caused two guys who were previously so close they virtually shared the same soul to turn on one another like this? The solution, as we quickly learned, was not as easy as an offhand insult, or a moment of lost temper. No, this was far deeper. If you know anything about Camron and JimJones' past, you'll know that their relationship was never totally smooth. Sure, they put on a unified front, and their partnership was one of the most successful in hip-hop, but beneath the gloss and glam of Dipset, there was always an underlying tension. Both tremendous personalities, both eager for success, and both very protective of their legacies. And when you have two massive egos in one group, you're certain to have conflicts. But it wasn't just the egos. After Dipset's collapse in the early 2000s, both Camron and JimJones came to understand that their financial empire wasn't as safe as they believed. Camron, the genius behind the organization, had always been the one calling the shots. JimJones, with his fiery attitude and larger-than-life character, he was no longer comfortable with being second in command. He wanted his own place, influence, and, maybe most importantly, a piece of the pie when money is involved. All kinds of concerns appear as Jim's own career began to gather steam. It became evident that he wasn't satisfied with merely being Camron's right-hand man. While Camron had his own intentions for the future, JimJones began to push back and challenge his status in the organization. Questioning Camron's judgments, the strain began to mount, and the tension between the two only intensified. Then came the rumors, whispers, that JimJones was being pushed out of Dipset. Camron was preparing to go alone, and there were negotiations behind closed doors that Jim wasn't a part of. Gradually, the fissures began to surface, and the public began to notice that the two hadn't been seen together as much, and when they were, the dynamic seemed odd. The old chemistry, the brotherhood, was no longer there. Something had changed. What about the real fight? The incident that ended up defining this entire saga, that wasn't just any random dispute. It wasn't simply a terrible night where things went out of hand. What transpired was the consequence of months, if not years, of simmering anger. There was no single incident that precipitated the fight. It was the culmination of everything that had building up for so long. When the two men were backstage surrounded by industry people, fans, and workers, something finally broke. JimJones, maybe feeling the weight of years, he undoubtedly believed this was his moment. He wanted power and respect, and he wasn't going to allow Camron continue to manage things without challenge. On the other hand, Camron, the alpha, was having none of it. He had spent his entire career being the one in command, and he wasn't going to let Jim start dictating terms. The dispute began as a whisper, a back and forth concerning business judgments, then the insults began. But what you need to understand is that these were not simply words. These were very personal attacks. These touched at your very core. They went beyond the normal "he's a sellout" or "he's a snake." These were slashes at their basic identities, and that's when things escalated. Camron reportedly shoved JimJones, sending him sprawling backward. In that brief second, everything changed. What had been an argument rapidly escalated into a full-fledged battle. Camron's Fist Gym's security raced in, but it was too late. This wasn't just a backstage battle, it was the death of Dipset as we knew it. However, the turmoil didn't finish with the fight. Oh no, it just worsened from there. After the incident, both guys were brought into arrest. Yes, you heard it correctly. The very same two men that formerly controlled the hip-hop business were now behind bars. Bars, the very same individuals who had helped establish the genre now face the repercussions of their conduct. Their names, previously associated with power and influence, are now emblazoned over every headline, but for all the wrong reasons. The arrest itself was a spectacle. As soon as the news broke, cameras flashed and reporters hurried to get statements, and fans flooded social media with their takes. But it wasn't just the arrest that had people talking. It was the sheer shock of it all. Who could have predicted this? Camron and JimJones was arrested in 2023. The same legends who previously roamed the streets are now facing legal ramifications for a backstage brawl. It was a surprising twist in a long-running drama. Anticipated coming as for the aftermath, it was only beginning. The issue on everyone's mind was whether Dipset would survive. Could the link that kept these two guys together be mended, or was this the beginning of the end for one of hip-hop's most renowned duos? Is when the drama truly begins. Now that the dust has settled, and the streets are attempting to make sense of what happened, the full implications of the confrontation between Camron and JimJones are only beginning to unravel. Fans are reeling, wondering if the mystique of Dipset is truly ended, or this tumultuous chapter is merely the beginning of something even greater. It's difficult to predict which direction this will go. But the shockwaves are already being felt far, and let's begin with the legal ramifications. Both Camron and JimJones were arrested, and while the accusations differ depending on the source you're hearing from, there's little doubt that this wasn't simply a little dispute backstage, turned into a full-fledged confrontation involving many persons, security, and witnesses. The fight took place in front of a crowd, which understandably began filming on their phones the minute things became hot. Footage of the brawl immediately made its rounds online, causing a media frenzy. Now, many people may not understand that the arrest wasn't the worst of it. The actual harm came in the shape of the accusations that followed. There were murmurs of assault charges, property damage, and the possibility of a lawsuit from the venue itself. Allegedly had been coping with severe damage to its property amid the turmoil of the incident. As we know, litigation may grow swiftly. In high-profile situations like this, their legal teams went into overdrive, urgently attempting to control the damage. As of now, there's no word on whether the charges will stand. But let's be serious. Because the reputational damage is permanent. Both of these guys, who previously bore the weight of an entire movement on their shoulders, are now embroiled in a public scandal that cannot simply be. But the legal repercussions were only one side of the problem. What about the financial fallout? For years, Camron and JimJones were prosperous. Entrepreneurs, brand builders, and artists have gained millions. However, we can't overlook the reality that their investments and collaborations are now in peril. Corporate sponsors, record labels, and business partners are already looking at these trends with concern. They have invested in the Dipset, Camron, and JimJones brands. With both guys being dragged through the dirt, who is prepared to back them? Who wants to be linked with this type of mess? Sources close to the case have revealed that many sponsors have distanced themselves from both Camron and JimJones. According to an unnamed source, a major apparel business that formerly cooperated with Jones was re-evaluating their contract in light of the arrest. Meanwhile, Camron, renowned for his multiple commercial endeavors, may face a comprehensive reworking of his financial empire. But let's talk about the fans, since this is where things get even more fascinating. In the era of social media, when everything is magnified and dissected in real time, the public's reaction has been explosive. Fans who previously admired the unity and strength of Dipset are now conflicted, with some rallying for their favorite member and others asking for both must face the repercussions of their conduct. The previously impenetrable heritage of Dipset is now under scrutiny, and many are beginning to ask if the dynasty is disintegrating. On one side, you have the ardent Dipset followers who have followed Camron and JimJones since day one. These fans are saddened, outraged, and bewildered. They want answers. They want to know why heroes are involved in anything like this. They can't conceive that they're idols. The guys who gave them songs like Sante We Fly High and Dipset anthem might go from dominating the hip-hop scene to this embarrassing catastrophe. These fans are also extremely loyal. and there's a strong probability that many will forgive them and continue to support them, especially if their favorite rappers can twist this predicament into a tale of redemption. However, there are other fans who see this as the final nail in the coffin, bidding goodbye to the Dipset they once knew and loved. Their choosing to move on. Social media surged with severe criticism, memes, and thought articles on how the disagreement between Camron and JimJones was a long time coming. Some fans have even gone as far as calling this the end of an era, symbolic collapse of the old-school period of hip-hop. The adoration for these two characters has been tainted, and while they'll always be legends in their own right, this controversy will long follow them like a shadow. The entertainment world, eager to move on, is already seeking to the next big thing. Will Camron and JimJones be able to restore their careers, or will this controversy plague them for the rest of their lives? It's too soon to say, but one thing is certain: the public and media will continue to scrutinize every step they make. The true test will come after the dust settles, and both men must confront their consequences head-on. The question everyone is asking is simple: what is next for Camron and JimJones? We may expect a frenzy of media appearances, interviews, and possibly even an apology tour, but there is no turning back. Once the public faith is damaged, it is difficult to repair. Both men will need to work relentlessly to redeem themselves, but it's unclear if they'll be able to recover the enchantment that made them big names in the first place. And so we find ourselves at the end of the narrative, or is it just the beginning? The truth is, the fallout from this backstage battle is far from done. We may yet see more twists and turns emerge in this drama, and as usual, we'll be here to report on it. One thing is certain: the drama, controversy, and betrayal will follow these two characters for years to come, and Dipset will never be the same. So let's ask you, the viewers, do you believe this is the end of Dipset as we know it? Or can Camron and JimJones emerge from the ashes of their backstage battle and redeem themselves? Let us know in the comments below. Also, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to be informed with the latest on this major incident. Well, there you have it, folks. The horrifying specifics of the Camron and JimJones backstage battle, the consequences, and everything in between, does not end here. No, this is only the beginning of a narrative that might impact the future of hip-hop and damage the reputations of two titans in the game. So, do you believe Dipset is over, or will Camron and JimJones emerge from the ashes of this disaster? We'd like to hear your opinions. Do you believe they can bounce? Is there a way out of this? Or is everything going downhill? From here, drop your views into the we read all the comments below. If you believe the narrative is far from over, remember to like, share, and subscribe, because we'll continue to bring you the don't miss out on the most recent happenings. Don't miss out. Click the notification bell to keep up with all the inner drama, scandals, and exclusive stories that you will not hear anyplace else. And remember, this is only the top of the iceberg. Stay tuned, because we have more. Jaw-dropping, exposes stunning revelations, and never-before-seen video is headed your way. You won't want to miss it. You won't want to miss it.